I imagine so far that you're finding this to be an unusual Christmas Day service. We started with a Tibetan chant, moved on to a favorite holiday carol, before going back to Buddhism for a story, then a prayer validating any faith path, responded to by a sung Buddhist mantra. And now we're moving on with our service as if it wasn't Christmas at all. You might be wondering if your minister is in need of a sabbatical or at least a vacation. And you might not be entirely wrong. But the unusualness of this service is in large part because there's no easy or expected way for a UU congregation to worship on Christmas Day. Acknowledge the holiday, lean into it, ignore it altogether. There is a deep-rooted tension, a tension within our faith movement that I learned early. Let me share with you two implicit learnings that I've gleaned over the years attending UU churches. The first came as a child attending UU Sunday school. I really got the sense at All Souls in New York City, my childhood congregation, that it never had a plan for my faith development. During the classes, I would play dreidel, learn the Hebrew alphabet, enact stories from the Torah, learn about Siddhartha's life, meditate, otherwise explore the world religions. But I never learned about the life of Jesus. When I would attend church upstairs in the sanctuary and sit in the pews, I would look at the white, unadorned walls where the minister preached in loose black robes in front of a big alcove behind a huge pulpit. And I could see in the artwork that hung in that church behind the minister, I could faintly make out a cross in the interweavings of its metal bands. Yet there, too, we never spoke about Jesus. We didn't talk about Jesus during the coffee hour either. I felt as a child that Jesus was the big white elephant in a place that otherwise I could only call a church. As an adult, the sense of taboo around this topic only grew. I learned in high school and in seminary to respect Christianity and Jesus as a teacher. I learned about how Unitarianism and Universalism emerged out of Christianity, and I could still see, as I did as a child, how close modern Unitarian Universalism was to Christianity. But I also learned that Jesus can be a taboo subject in our congregations, that of all the great prophets and teachers, despite our heritage, he is the one to be avoided. Which explains today. How do we, as Unitarian Universalists, authentically celebrate Christmas? More important to me and to other souls being raised here, welcomed here, seeking refuge here, how can we do the personal and collective work of essentially destigmatizing Jesus? Considering that Christianity is the primary root to the tree that has become Unitarian Universalism, are we going to abandon our treehouse just because we don't like the seeds that they sprouted from? Do we think that there's more love somewhere else besides here? Now, these are questions that can't be answered in one sermon and really don't even get answered in a decade, but they're ones that I offer to you to reflect on. Today, I want to share one method you may want to use if you decide to engage these questions further. Study Buddhism. Study Buddhism and Christianity, study Christianity and Judaism, study Judaism and Hinduism, study all of these or one of these next to Unitarian Universalism. In essence, as Paul Knitter writes, be religious interreligiously. Buddhist monk, author, and leader Thich Nhat Hanh and Catholic theologian, teacher, and former priest Paul Knitter are both religious interreligiously, and interestingly, in different ways. Thich Nhat Hanh is a deep embracer, and Paul Knitter is a deep questioner of Buddhism and Christianity. Thich Nhat Hanh emphasizes the similarities. He notes, for instance, that both the historical figure of the Buddha and the historical figure of Jesus witnessed great suffering within their societies, and they both developed a path out of suffering that was appealing to their respective followers. Both men took spiritual solitary retreats for contemplation and renewal. Hanh writes, "When we look into and touch deeply the life and teachings of Jesus, we can penetrate the reality of God. Love, understanding, courage, acceptance are expressions of the life of Jesus." Han's methods help us see important characteristics of Jesus as a social leader and as a spiritual practitioner that we might otherwise have missed. Characteristics that I hope you find important to be in religious leaders today. The historical Buddha and Jesus were men whose lives reveal deeply meaningful, sacred ways of living and connecting to a higher reality. These men were wise, yes, but not so different from ourselves that they cannot stand as role models for each of us. Hanh goes further, and this is where I think things get interesting, because he helps us re-examine our conceptualization of an eternal, ever-abiding Jesus. Hanh speaks of the living Buddha, who in Mahayana Buddhism is a glorious, eternal Buddha who is always expounding the Dharma, or teachings of enlightenment. If one is attuned, one can hear the living Buddha's Dharma emerging from a pebble, a leaf, bird. Similarly, Hanh describes the living Christ as the Christ of love, who is always generating love, moment after moment. He instructs. Christians have to help Jesus Christ be manifest in their way of life by showing those around them that love, understanding, and tolerance. The living Buddha and the living Jesus are concepts or spiritual rivers that continue to flow, that reveal, that speak to, and inform our existence in ways that are not bounded by history, by geography, or by the centuries. Unitarian Universalists understandably balk at the idea of a bodily reincarnated Christ who walks among us and whose goodness and death on the cross were meant to serve as a sacrifice to appease an angry God. But I find it much harder, much harder altogether to resist the notion that Christians are meant to speak their faith by living out love, understanding, and tolerance as a means to say, Jesus is real for me in my life, now, on this day. Hanh encourages us such 180s in religious perspective. He quotes the second precept of the order of interbeing. Do not think the knowledge you presently possess is changeless, absolute truth. Avoid being narrow-minded and bound to the present view. Learn and practice non-attachment to views in order to be receptive to others' viewpoints. Be open and non-attached to your views. Perhaps learn new ways of being religious or interreligious. That doesn't mean that such reflection comes easy. I think we all remember the pupil from the earlier story, especially when one's religious education or as we sometimes like to say, indoctrination, has been narrow, repetitive, and thorough. But it may be necessary. In fact, self-questioning is where Paul Knitter begins. He writes, "More and more I found myself, a Catholic Christian all my life, a theologian by profession, having to ask myself, what really do I or can I believe?" Essentially, this wonderful, kind man, Knitter was actually my academic advisor in seminary, was having a spiritual or theological crisis. Never easy in the Catholic Church. But one he resolved in his tellingly titled book, "Without Buddha, I Couldn't Be a Christian." And he resolved this tension by diving into Buddhism. He learned several important things about the Buddha and Buddhist teachings that reformed his thinking as a Christian. Here's what he learned. Buddha was a searcher who gained enlightenment. That in Theravada Buddhism, the Buddha is a teacher who shows in his actions and that embodies what all of us could achieve in our own lives. He demonstrates the path to walk. That in Mahayana Buddhism, the Buddha is more than human, a presence that steps into human lives and provides assistance for the difficult task of achieving enlightenment. We don't become enlightened alone, but there's help in us doing it, and we each can. And that the Maitreya Buddha is the future Buddha who will come to save humanity when we face future dangers. With 84,000 Buddhas, we could go on to next Christmas. But Knitter pulled out two even more important Buddhist teachings. First, Tibetan Buddhists remind us that of all these Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, in their external reality are reflections of and a means to identify realities in our very self. In other words, each Buddha reflects a reality within us that we can then, by reflecting on that specific Buddha, identify. In Buddha, in each of its manifestations, we see ourselves. And we see ourselves in a way that inspires us to grow deeper into our best selves. And second, Knitter learned, Buddha is such a powerful savior because he's such a good teacher. I think many of us have had a powerful teacher in our lives and understands the power, the saving power of a great teacher. Now, what is interesting about Knitter's work for us is that he took these learnings back and used them to examine his own faith, to do one of those 180s I was talking about earlier. Here are some of the things that he realized about Jesus as a result. He writes, Jesus' divinity was not something that came down and landed in him. It was rather something that Jesus became. And what he became was something within him that he realized, became aware of, responded to. Jesus grew into divinity. He woke up to it, much like Gautama Buddha woke up. For Knitter, Jesus' saving quality was that he became enlightened. He became someone who effectively taught his path of enlightenment to others. This waking up to our inner divinity, waking up to our ability to teach others a spiritual path. This is a Christology, a way of thinking about Jesus, that is much more in line with traditional UU ways of thinking about or conceptualizing Jesus. It is a view that holds that Jesus is a person who grew over a period of time into a spiritual awakening that transformed his lives and the lives of those around him. It is a spiritual awakening that he found best to explore with others in community. He was a spiritually engaged person and teacher. If only this was something we talked more about in our UU congregations. If not this exact Christology, then a Christology that was relevant and meaning to our lives and that we could communicate to others within our society. Consider it. Consider starting an interreligious conversation with yourself. In what ways can you embrace another faith? What questions about your faith are arising in you? What beliefs about Christianity or Buddhism need some airing out? What new language might be transformative to your way of thinking? Consider those elements of religion that seem universal and the elements that seem particular to a certain faith. Compare and contrast. Where are you on your journey? Where will you draw from? Consider faith as something dynamic, vital, changing, a system of beliefs that you could live out, that clarifies and opens doorways that lead you to living your faith more comfortably and fully. Consider which messenger, which Buddha, which Jesus, which Mohammed, which prophet has the greatest transformational pull over your life. May whatever questions you ask or answers you arrive at bring you to a place where you are fully alive. Be faithful, be alive every day. Amen. So today, we're going to do an extended meditation in honor of the fact that Buddha and Jesus were both contemplative spiritual practitioners. So I'm going to give you some instructions to do a contemplative practice, and then we're going to sit for 7 minutes, right? And then at the end of 7 minutes, we're going to do a little bow to ourselves and to each other for holding this space of contemplation. So I invite you to put both of your feet on the ground and to find a comfortable seat. Feel yourself steadied over your hip bones. I invite you to put one hand in another and to let your thumbs just gently kiss. A great way to know if you're being attentive to your practice is to figure out if your thumbs are kind of battling each other, or if they kind of drift apart out of a relationship. So you kind of just want to hold them in that gentle kiss. And of course, you want to look down kind of into the pews ahead of you. And you want to find a stillness in your body. And most important of all, that gentle smile, welcoming love and acceptance into the world. Now, Buddhists always love to say, just empty your mind. Let your thoughts go. Don't hold on to anything. But that's hard for us. So I'm going to give you 2 mantras as an option. One is the opening line from the singing response that we had earlier. Let ye be lamps unto yourselves. Let ye be lamps unto yourselves. And the other one is a biblical text, and it's, I am in you, and you are in me, and we are in God. I am in you, and you are in me, and we are in God. May you find your center again and position your body. I'm going to set a little alarm so I don't go on for 10 minutes. And let us begin by bowing to each other and coming back to our place of meditation.